When my boss said, "You should be grateful we hired you," I smiled. But in that moment, I quietly decided how this story would end. My name is Tran. I'm a Vietnamese-American woman in my early 30s, holding a dual degree in marketing and data analytics from NYU. After nearly a decade of grinding in small agencies, I finally landed a job at a prestigious media consulting firm in downtown Chicago, Grayson & Vail. The name alone opened doors. To me, it felt like a breakthrough. At least, at first. Grayson & Vail prided itself on diversity, splashing BIPOC faces all over their recruitment brochures. But inside those glass walls, I was one of 2 women of color in a department of nearly 40. From day one, it felt like I was expected to prove why I deserved to be there, over and over again. During onboarding, the HR manager kept emphasizing how inclusive the company was. My manager, however, had a different tone. Mark, late 40s, pressed suits, golf jokes, and a permanent smirk like he knew something you didn't. He never bothered to learn how to pronounce my last name. "Just Luna," he said. Less confusing for everyone. On my second week, I pitched a content strategy during our brainstorming session. Mark glanced at me, then at the rest of the room. "Let's keep ideas realistic," he said, completely dismissing my input without even addressing it. I stayed silent. I told myself, prove yourself first, speak louder later. But that moment became a pattern. My ideas were routinely passed over. I was left out of critical meetings. When I tried to follow up on projects, I was told decisions were already made. Yet, ironically, my work, my data reports, my creative insights, were used in decks without my name ever appearing. I was good enough to be mined, but not enough to be credited. The turning point came during a client lunch. Mark was charming, the perfect host. But as we walked out, he turned to me and said with a chuckle, "You should be grateful we hired you. A resume like yours usually ends up in the pile." I didn't flinch, I didn't cry, I smiled. That night, I stared at my bedroom ceiling for hours, replaying that line in my head like a broken record. You should be grateful. Something shifted in me. Gratitude? For being disrespected? For being invisible? No, I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to prepare. And when the time was right, they'd never see it coming. After that night, something inside me shifted, from quiet frustration to quiet planning. I didn't walk into work the next morning seeking revenge. I walked in, seeking proof. About 3 weeks later, our team was tasked with developing a new campaign proposal for a high-profile skincare brand. This was the kind of client that could make or break careers. Mark made it very clear this was an all-hands-on-deck situation. But somehow, I wasn't included in the strategy meetings. Again, instead of making noise, I decided to work behind the scenes. I stayed late, pored over the brand's previous campaigns, analyzed trends, studied competitor data, and developed a pitch deck that was bold, fresh, and data-driven. I titled it Glow Unfiltered, a campaign celebrating real skin, unedited beauty, and diverse representation. I submitted the deck to Mark privately, attaching all supporting files and research. His response? A curt, "Thanks, I'll take a look." I didn't expect applause. I just wanted a seat at the table. A week later, we had a team-wide presentation. Mark walked into the room, flanked by his favorite associate, Bryce. Blonde, confident, Ivy League. Everyone knew Bryce was groomed for leadership, despite rarely delivering anything original. Then Mark introduced Bryce's groundbreaking campaign idea, called True Glow. As Bryce clicked through the slides, my stomach dropped. It was my concept, my structure, my exact data points. Even the campaign tagline was a slightly watered-down version of mine. But my name? Not mentioned once. Not only had they stolen my work, they'd erased my existence from it. I sat through that meeting numb, my hands clenched beneath the table. A few coworkers glanced at me, knowingly. One of them, Janelle, an editor I'd grown close with, leaned over and whispered, "That's your deck, isn't it?" I nodded once. Eyes forward, I didn't react. Not yet. Later that day, I went to the server and downloaded every version of the campaign files I had worked on. I timestamped my emails. I backed up folders to a personal drive. Every asset, every note, every version history. I even took photos of whiteboard sessions where I'd sketched the structure in brainstorming mode weeks earlier. But the final sting came during the project credits document. I asked Mark if my name would be included. He smirked. "We usually only list core contributors. But don't worry, being part of the team means you share the win." I forced a smile. Right. Thanks for the clarity. In that moment, I realized something vital. Mark didn't see me as a threat. He saw me as a silent worker bee. Useful, disposable, forgettable. And that was his first mistake. Because while he was busy stealing my voice, I was quietly sharpening my blade. After the True Glow presentation, everything moved at lightning speed. The client was thrilled. Contracts were signed, bonuses were hinted at. And Bryce? He was treated like the second coming of Don Draper. Everyone in the department started orbiting around him, laughing at his weak jokes, echoing his half-baked opinions, calling him a rising star. Me? I was quietly sidelined. Mark called me into his office the day after the official client approval. We're moving fast now, he said, tapping his pen against a stack of mock-ups. Bryce will take the lead on rollout. I'm assigning you to the internal analytics cleanup. Not sexy, I know, but someone's got to do the grunt work. I stared at him. So I'm being pulled off the campaign I created? He looked up with a smirk. You were part of the brainstorm, sure, but Bryce made it client-ready. It's about polish, Luna. You're talented, but still a bit raw. Raw. That word hit harder than I expected, as if I was half-formed, decorative. Lucky to be in the room. I left his office without another word. But inside, something cracked. A few days later, Mark sent out a department-wide email announcing the new project team. Bryce, of course, was named as strategic lead. Beneath him, 5 other names, including the intern who once asked me how to spell campaign. My name wasn't there. I stared at the screen for a long time, then quietly forwarded the email to my personal account. Added it to the folder I had labeled receipts. I tried to keep my head down, focus on work. But the internal analytics assignment was a graveyard. Outdated systems, forgotten reports, piles of digital clutter no one wanted to deal with. It wasn't just a reassignment. It was a slow professional death. Then came the HR meeting. A woman named Celine, who always smiled like she was trying to win Employee of the Month, invited me for a wellness chat. Inside the glass-walled room, she offered tea and a form titled Employee Performance Alignment. There's been some concern, she said gently. Your recent behavior has been perceived as distant, difficult. We want to help. Help me? I asked, eyebrows raised. She nodded. We're recommending a few coaching sessions, just to better integrate you into team culture. You're very talented, Luna, but sometimes your tone is misinterpreted. Misinterpreted. Another polite way to say too assertive, too quiet, too much, not enough. Whatever they needed it to mean. I asked, was there a complaint? We can't disclose names, she said with a rehearsed smile, but it's best to take feedback proactively. I signed nothing. Just thanked her and walked out. That afternoon, my desk was moved. Not even to another team, but to a lone cubicle near the printer. People stopped looping me into emails. I became a ghost with a badge. One day in the kitchen, I overheard 2 interns whispering, "She's the one they're watching, right?" Yeah. Mark said she's unpredictable, could explode anytime. That was the moment I realized this wasn't incompetence. This wasn't office politics. This was a slow erasure. And it was working, because I started doubting myself. Started thinking maybe I was imagining it all. Maybe I wasn't polished enough. Maybe I should be grateful. But that spiral only lasted a day. That night, I pulled out everything I'd collected. Emails, slide versions, screenshots, calendar invites, even chat logs where Bryce asked for random stats that showed up, word for word, in the final pitch. I created a master folder, password protected, backed up on 3 drives. And then I remembered Vanessa. 3 years ago, I'd freelanced for the skincare brand, now working with Grayson and Vale. Vanessa had been the creative director on a small campaign I supported. We'd clicked, talked about immigrant parents, imposter syndrome, hustle culture. She once told me, "Don't let them shrink you." I found her LinkedIn. Still listed at the company. Still connected. I didn't message her yet. Not directly. I needed more. I needed certainty. That's when fate handed me a gift. One evening I stayed late. My desk was close to a shared conference room. I heard laughter, turned my head and saw Bryce inside, practicing his pitch. He stumbled over the data slides. "I just ripped this from that Asian girl's deck," he told a designer. "No clue what it means. Hope the client doesn't ask." The designer laughed. "Just talk fast and smile." I pulled out my phone. No visuals, just audio. 15 seconds. Enough. Enough to prove he knew exactly what he was doing. Enough to show this wasn't an accident. enough to flip the story. They thought they were silencing me. But I was documenting everything, and soon, they'd be the ones explaining themselves. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the audio in my head, Bryce laughing, mocking, bragging. I didn't know what burned more, the theft or the casual way he spoke about it. Like I wasn't even human, just some Asian girl with a file he could plunder. The next morning, I arrived early, not to work, but to plan. I printed out a timeline of events, when I created the original deck, when I sent it to Mark, when True Glow mysteriously appeared. I highlighted timestamps, email threads, Slack conversations. I included the transcription of Bryce's little performance. Then I walked straight to the Ethics and Compliance office. No appointments. No warning. The woman at the front desk blinked when I slid the folder across. "This is detailed." "It's just a copy," I said. "The original is secured elsewhere." She looked up at me. "Do you want to submit this anonymously?" "No. I want it tied to my name," I said firmly. "And I want you to understand something. This isn't just about me. If they're willing to do this to one employee, they'll do worse if no one stops them." She nodded slowly and promised to escalate it. By noon, I received a calendar invite for a clarification meeting with HR and a senior compliance officer. It was set for the next morning. I knew what that meant. They were scared enough to react, but confident enough to think they could contain it. That night, I did two things. First, I sent a short email to Vanessa, my old contact at the client company. Nothing dramatic, just a friendly check-in, asking if she was still with the brand and saying I'd love to reconnect over coffee soon. Second, I rehearsed my meeting answers like I was preparing for trial. But the next day, it was a performance of its own kind. Celine from HR sat across from me with a carefully blank face. The compliance officer, Mr. Dell, wore glasses too small for his face and never looked me in the eye. They let me speak. They asked a few vague questions. Then they hit me with it. "There's no clear evidence of malicious intent," Mr. Dell said. "While the similarities are unfortunate, collaborative work often results in overlapping contributions." I stared at him. "So a full campaign, title, structure, data, gets lifted, repackaged, and I'm excluded from credit, and that's just coincidence?" He folded his hands. "We're not saying you're wrong, just that it's inconclusive at this point. They were trying to wait me out, wear me down, bury the problem quietly." I gave a small smile. "Understood. Just so we're clear, I'm keeping a record of this meeting, for my own protection." Celine looked up. "Luna, we're all on the same team here." I stood. "Then act like it." I walked out calmly. No anger, no begging. That afternoon, Mark passed my desk, smug as ever. "Tough week, huh?" he said, like he was offering pity. I met his eyes. "You have no idea." He laughed and walked away. He thought it was over. He thought I'd failed. But all I'd done was test how far the system was willing to protect him. And now I had my answer. It was time to go higher. Mark thought I walked out of that compliance meeting defeated. He thought the half-hearted internal review was enough to scare me into silence. But what he didn't know was that his smug dismissal gave me exactly what I needed. Confirmation that the company would protect him, not the truth. So I stopped trying to play nice. The same afternoon I left that meeting, I got a response from Vanessa, my old contact at the skincare brand. "Of course I remember you. Let's definitely catch up. I've actually been meaning to ask if you're involved in the new True Glow campaign. The team at Grayson speaks highly of Bryce. It sounded like your kind of work, though." That sentence lit a fire in me. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I spent the weekend crafting the most comprehensive summary of what really happened. The original campaign deck I submitted, the stolen data, the version histories, the audio clip, and even quotes from coworkers who had privately admitted they'd seen me work on it first. I wasn't just documenting events. I was building a case. On Monday morning, I sent Vanessa a secure file with a brief note. "I wanted to answer your question honestly. I was the original creator of the campaign, but as you'll see, that credit was taken from me. I'm not looking for sympathy. I just thought you deserved the truth." I didn't expect her to respond immediately. She was a senior exec, busy, and probably navigating her own politics. But less than 3 hours later, she called me directly. Her voice was tight, controlled. "Luna, I don't even know what to say. This is unacceptable. I had no idea. We greenlit this campaign under the assumption that Bryce was the lead strategist." I didn't say much. just now you know." She went quiet, then said, "Can I share this with legal?" I smiled. "That's why I sent it." 2 days later, chaos hit Grayson and Vale like a thunderclap. The skincare brand's legal department issued a formal notice to Grayson's executive board. They were suspending the campaign pending an internal review and launching their own investigation into the creative attribution of True Glow. They also requested a meeting with the original creator, me. Word spread through the office like wildfire. Bryce looked like a man walking into a job interview he hadn't prepared for. His usual swagger was gone. At lunch, he tried to approach me. "Hey Luna, can we talk?" I didn't even look up. "We're past that." Later that afternoon, Mark summoned me into a conference room. This time, he wasn't smug. His voice was low, clipped. "What exactly did you send the client?" "The truth. You've put us in a very difficult position." "No, Mark. You put yourself in this position. I just stopped letting you control the narrative." He tried to shift gears. "We value your contributions. Maybe we could revisit your involvement, retroactively credit your work." I laughed. "You mean now that you've been caught?" He didn't respond. The next day, Grayson held a mandatory town hall. The COO stood before the company, tight-lipped, announcing that the True Glow campaign had been terminated and that certain team members were under investigation for ethical misconduct and IP misappropriation. Mark wasn't there. Bryce was escorted out by security before noon. I found out later that both had been placed on indefinite leave. By Friday, their names were removed from the company directory. No explanations. No goodbyes. But the best part, the brand reached out to me, not just to thank me, but to offer me a consulting role to lead their future campaigns. They said they valued creators who told the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. That weekend, as I sat at my favorite coffee shop reviewing the contract they sent over, I received an email from Grayson and Vale's executive board. They wanted to re-engage in dialogue regarding my future with the company. I didn't reply. Why would I? They didn't just lose a client, they lost something far more valuable, my silence. And for the first time in months, I breathed freely. Not because they were gone, but because I finally stopped shrinking to fit their version of me. In the days following the town hall, silence fell over the Grayson and Vale offices like fog. The laughter, the hallway banter, the clinking of coffee mugs, all gone. No one wanted to be caught speaking too loudly or to the wrong person. Mark's office door remained shut. The frosted glass that once displayed his name and title was stripped bare. The silence around his absence spoke volumes. Officially, he was on leave, pending investigation. Unofficially, everyone knew he was finished. I heard whispers in the elevator. One account manager said he'd been blacklisted from 3 major agencies within 48 hours. Another mentioned that he tried to speak at a private networking event, only to be uninvited at the last minute. His name had become radioactive. Bryce? He didn't even try to fight it. One morning he showed up, was quietly escorted out with a cardboard box, and by the afternoon, his LinkedIn was gone. Just erased, like he never existed. Internally, damage control went into overdrive. Leadership sent out emails filled with hollow promises about rebuilding trust and listening to employee voices. But it was too late. The culture they'd built, where credit was stolen and silence was rewarded, was exposed for what it truly was. Clients began pulling out. Not just the skincare brand, but others who'd been watching from the sidelines. Some cited misalignment in values. Others didn't even bother giving reasons. A quiet panic spread through upper management, and me, I became a cautionary tale, with a twist. I wasn't fired, I wasn't reprimanded, I wasn't even contacted for a formal exit interview. Instead, I received a brief email from the board, thanking me for bringing clarity to an unfortunate situation and offering me the chance to redefine my role at the firm. I didn't respond, because I already had another offer, a better one. The skincare brand had brought me on as a lead strategy consultant, with a seat at the table, with my name on every deck, every press release, every credit. They didn't just want my ideas, they wanted my voice. My first campaign launch under their name made waves across the industry. Glow Unfiltered, the original title they had tried to water down, was back, in its purest form. It was honest, diverse, and powerful. Just like I intended, and the industry noticed. A marketing journal published a feature about it. The headline, From the sidelines to center stage, how one woman reclaimed her work and redefined the rules. When asked for comment, I only said, "Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy." I wasn't interested in revenge for its own sake. I didn't need to watch Mark beg or see Bryce humiliated. That wasn't the point. The point was simple. They tried to erase me, and now their names are the ones missing. 3 months later, I was invited to speak at a private leadership summit, hosted by the same brand that had hired me as a consultant. It was a gathering of CMOs, brand directors, agency heads, all the power players in the room. I almost said no. I didn't want to be the woman who exposed corruption forever. I wanted to be known for my work, not just my war. But then I saw the theme of the summit: authenticity, ownership, and the future of creative leadership. And I realized I had something to say. When the day arrived, I stood backstage in a black suit, holding my notes. A part of me expected the old nerves to return, the imposter syndrome, the doubt, the shrinking instinct. But they didn't, because for the first time in years, I wasn't walking into a room hoping to be seen. I already knew my value. When I took the stage, the room fell silent. Phones went down. Eyes locked on me. I began with a single sentence. This is not a story about a stolen idea. This is a story about what happens when you try to silence the wrong person. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I spoke about invisible labor, about being spoken over, about being told to be grateful just for existing in the room. I spoke about the cost of silence and the power of knowing when to break it. Halfway through my speech, I looked into the audience and saw someone I didn't expect: Grayson & Vale's newly appointed interim CEO. Apparently, they'd registered last minute after learning I'd be speaking. Our eyes met for a moment. They looked uncomfortable. Good. At the end of my talk, I shared one final story, one I'd never told publicly. In the weeks after the scandal, Grayson's board had tried to quietly settle with me. Not just with money, but with a contract. They offered me a promotion, full credit for the True Glow campaign, and a revised narrative they hoped I'd approve. One where the misunderstanding was mutual. One where everyone could move on with dignity. I declined. Because the truth doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be remembered. And then came the twist I saved for last. I told the summit audience that I had started mentoring a group of young creatives, specifically women of color entering the marketing world. Not for exposure, not for PR, but because no one should have to learn the hard way that silence is never safety. It's delay. I closed with this. When someone tells you to be grateful for being in the room, remind them, you didn't come to decorate the table. You came to build your own. The room erupted in applause. That moment wasn't revenge. It wasn't even victory. It was clarity. Mark and Bryce thought they were the gatekeepers. What they didn't realize was the gate was already open. They just weren't invited anymore. And me? I didn't just reclaim my voice, I multiplied it.